For decades, we've poured trillions into programs designed to help the poor. Yet poverty persists, families break apart, and dependency grows. The uncomfortable truth. Our good intentions have created a system that perpetuates the very problems we sought to solve. Today, I'll show you why effective poverty relief requires us to look beyond feelings to facts, beyond intentions to results. The evidence is clear. The policies that make us feel good about helping often harm those we claim to help most. When we measure success by outcomes rather than emotions, when we follow the data rather than our hearts, we discover that true compassion demands economic freedom, not government dependency. The choice isn't between caring and not caring about the poor, it's between policies that actually work and those that merely satisfy our desire to feel helpful. Let me walk you through the empirical evidence that shows why ignoring feelings might be the most compassionate thing we can do. Chapter 1: The Welfare Trap: When Good Intentions Create Bad Outcomes. Let me begin with a fundamental observation from my years studying social policy. The programs that make us feel most generous often produce results that would horrify us if we truly understood their consequences. This isn't ideology speaking. It's decades of careful empirical analysis showing how well-intentioned welfare programs create perverse incentives that trap people in poverty rather than lifting them out. Consider the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program as it existed for much of the 20th century. On the surface, it seemed compassionate, provide financial support to struggling families. But examine the incentive structure, and you'll find something disturbing. The system penalized marriage by reducing benefits when two-parent families formed. It penalized work by cutting aid when recipients found employment. It penalized savings by eliminating benefits if families accumulated modest assets. The data tells the story. In 1960, 5.1% of births were to unmarried mothers. By 1990, after 3 decades of expanding welfare programs, that figure had risen to 28%. Among African American families, where welfare dependency became most concentrated, the out-of-wedlock birth rate soared from 23% to 68% over the same period. These aren't mere statistics, they represent millions of children growing up in single-parent households, statistically far more likely to experience poverty, educational failure, and social problems. The welfare system created what economists call a poverty trap, a situation where rational individuals, responding to the incentives they face, make choices that keep them poor. A single mother might lose $3,000 in benefits and healthcare coverage if she took a job, paying $3,000 in benefits and healthcare coverage if she took a job, paying $3,000 in benefits and healthcare coverage if she took a job, paying $15,000. The effective marginal tax rate on her earnings could exceed 100%. Economically, staying on welfare made perfect sense. But here's what troubles me most. Those who designed and defended these programs felt good about their compassion while ignoring the mounting evidence of dysfunction. They measured success by how much money they spent, how many people they enrolled, how generous the benefits became. They never seriously examined whether the programs actually helped people escape poverty permanently. The human cost of this misguided compassion is staggering. We created multi-generational welfare dependency, destroyed family structures in entire communities, and condemned millions to lives of economic stagnation. All because we prioritized our feelings over the facts, our intentions over the outcomes. Chapter 2: The Negative Income Tax, a Market-Based Alternative. During my work on social policy, I developed a proposal that seemed counterintuitive to both traditional conservatives and liberals: the negative income tax. This isn't welfare as we know it, it's a market-based system that preserves work incentives while providing a genuine safety net. The difference matters enormously, both economically and morally. Here's how it works. Instead of a complex bureaucracy determining who deserves what benefits under which conditions, We establish a guaranteed minimum income level. If your earnings fall below that level, the government pays you the difference. But, and this is crucial, every dollar you earn reduces your government payment by less than $1. This preserves the incentive to work, to improve your skills, to seek better opportunities. The traditional welfare system creates what economists call a welfare cliff. You're often worse off working than not working. The negative income tax creates a slope, not a cliff. A single mother earning $10,000 might receive $10,000 might receive $10,000 might receive $5,000 from the government. If she finds a way to earn $15,000, she might receive $15,000. She might receive $15,000. She might receive $3,000 from the government, leaving her with $18,000 total, clearly better off for her effort. But the real genius lies in what the system eliminates: the massive bureaucracy that currently determines eligibility, monitors compliance, and creates perverse incentives. No more welfare caseworkers deciding whether a family deserves help. No more rules that penalize marriage, saving, or self-improvement. No more administrative costs that consume enormous resources while producing no direct benefit to the poor. The empirical evidence from pilot programs in the 1970s was revealing. The negative income tax experiments in Seattle, Denver, and other cities showed modest reductions in work effort, far less than critics predicted, but dramatic improvements in family stability and children's educational outcomes. Most importantly, the programs demonstrated that you could provide meaningful assistance without creating the dependency trap that characterizes traditional welfare. Why hasn't this approach been adopted? Because it requires us to abandon the satisfying illusion that we can engineer perfect outcomes through detailed government control. It requires trusting that poor people, like everyone else, respond rationally to incentives. It requires measuring success by whether people escape poverty, not by whether bureaucrats have jobs administering complex rules. The negative income tax represents what true compassion looks like: a system designed to work rather than to make us feel good about our generosity. Chapter 3: Choice versus Control: Educational Freedom for the Poor. The education debate perfectly illustrates why helping the poor requires ignoring the feelings of middle-class bureaucrats and focusing on results for children. For decades, we've trapped poor families in failing schools while wealthy families exercise choice through private schools or by moving to better districts. The moral obscenity of this system should offend anyone who truly cares about equality of opportunity. I've long advocated for educational vouchers, giving parents direct control over education dollars so they can choose the schools that best serve their children. The response from the education establishment is predictably emotional. This will destroy public education. It will increase inequality. It shows we don't care about public schools. Notice how quickly the debate shifts from what works for children to what feels right to adults. But examine the evidence from school choice programs worldwide, and you'll find something remarkable. When poor families gain educational freedom, their children's academic performance improves. In Milwaukee, the first American city to implement school vouchers for low-income families, longitudinal studies show significant gains in high school graduation rates and college enrollment for African American students. Similar patterns emerge in Washington, D.C., Louisiana, and internationally in places like Chile and Sweden. The mechanism isn't mysterious. When schools must compete for students rather than being guaranteed enrollment regardless of performance, they improve. When parents can vote with their feet rather than just their voices, bad schools close and good schools expand. When teachers and administrators know their jobs depend on results rather than political connections, they focus on education rather than bureaucracy. But here's what the critics never acknowledge: the current system already provides school choice for those who can afford it. Wealthy families buy houses in districts with good schools or pay private school tuition. Middle-class families make enormous sacrifices to escape failing schools. Only the poor are told they must accept whatever the government assigns their children. The resistance to school choice reveals the fundamental problem with much anti-poverty policy. It prioritizes the interests of providers over consumers, bureaucrats over beneficiaries. Teachers' unions oppose vouchers not because they harm children, the evidence suggests the opposite, but because they threaten the monopoly power that allows poor performance to persist without consequence. During my years studying education policy, I've observed a consistent pattern. Those who most loudly proclaim their concern for the poor are often those most determined to deny them the choices that everyone else takes for granted. They'll spend enormous sums on programs that produce minimal results while opposing reforms that could transform children's lives. True compassion in education means caring more about whether children learn than whether adults feel good about the system. It means measuring success by student achievement, not by how much we spend or how much bureaucrats approve of our methods. Chapter 4: Housing Policy: How Rent Control Destroys What It Claims to Protect. Few policies better demonstrate how ignoring economic reality in favor of good intentions can devastate the very people we're trying to help than rent control. The policy feels compassionate: keep housing affordable for the poor by preventing landlords from raising rents. The reality is devastating. Rent control systematically destroys the housing supply and condemns the poor to substandard living conditions. The economic logic is straightforward, though politicians prefer to ignore it. When you prevent prices from rising to market levels, you create shortages. When you limit the returns to property investment, you discourage maintenance and new construction. When you give tenants security regardless of their behavior, you eliminate incentives for responsible tenancy. The result is predictable: housing quality deteriorates, supply shrinks, and those most in need find themselves shut out entirely. I've watched this tragedy unfold in cities across America. In New York City, where rent control has existed for decades, the policy has created a two-tier housing market that perfectly illustrates the perverse effects of price controls. Rent-controlled apartments are often poorly maintained because landlords have no economic incentive to invest in properties that can't generate market returns. Meanwhile, the limited supply of uncontrolled apartments commands premium prices, making housing less affordable for everyone not lucky enough to hold a controlled lease. The data is unambiguous. Cities with strict rent control laws consistently show slower rates of new construction, higher rates of building abandonment, and greater housing inequality than cities with market-based systems. San Francisco, with its elaborate rent control regime, has some of the highest housing costs in America precisely because the policy has prevented the supply response that would normally moderate prices. But the human cost extends beyond mere statistics. Rent control creates what economists call housing immobility. People stay in apartments not because they're optimal for their needs, but because moving means losing their controlled rent. This prevents the efficient allocation of housing resources and often leaves empty nesters in large apartments while young families crowd into inadequate spaces. The policy also systematically discriminates against the very groups it claims to help. When landlords can't raise rents on existing tenants, they become extremely selective about new tenants. Why rent to someone with marginal credit or income when you can't adjust terms if problems arise? The result is that minorities, young people, and others with limited economic power find themselves effectively excluded from rent-controlled markets. Most perversely, rent control often benefits middle-class tenants at the expense of the poor. In Manhattan, you'll find lawyers and doctors paying controlled rents of $500 per month for apartments that would command $500 per month for apartments that would command $500 per month for apartments that would command $3,000 on the open market, while poor families struggle to find any housing they can afford. The alternative isn't abandoning the poor to market forces, it's recognizing that markets, properly functioning, serve the poor better than government controls. When housing supply can respond to demand, when investors have incentives to maintain and improve properties, when prices can signal scarcity and abundance, housing becomes more available and affordable for everyone. The tragedy is that we know this. Economic analysis of rent control is remarkably unanimous. It's a policy that fails by every measure. Yet cities continue implementing and expanding these programs because politicians care more about the immediate emotional satisfaction of doing something than about the long-term consequences for the people they claim to help. Chapter 5: Minimum Wage Laws, the cruelest cut for entry-level workers. Perhaps no policy better illustrates the gap between good intentions and harmful results than minimum wage laws. The emotional appeal is undeniable: ensure that working people earn enough to live with dignity. The economic reality is far more complex and often tragic. Minimum wage laws price the most vulnerable workers out of the job market entirely. The fundamental economic principle at work is simple. When you mandate that something must be sold above its market value, less of it will be purchased. Labor follows the same rules as any other commodity. When government requires employers to pay $15 per hour for work that produces only $15 per hour for work that produces only $15 per hour for work that produces only $12 per hour in value, rational employers simply won't hire those workers. The jobs disappear, and the very people the law was meant to help find themselves unemployed. The empirical evidence consistently supports this analysis. Study after study shows that minimum wage increases reduce employment opportunities for low-skilled workers, particularly teenagers, minorities, and those with limited education. In Seattle, after the city implemented a $15 minimum wage, researchers found significant job losses among the very workers the policy was designed to help. Low-wage workers saw their hours cut so dramatically that many earned less total income despite the higher hourly rate. But the damage extends beyond immediate job losses. Minimum wage laws eliminate what economists call the first rung of the economic ladder, entry-level positions that allow inexperienced workers to develop skills, establish work histories, and demonstrate reliability to future employers. When these opportunities disappear, we condemn young people to extended periods of unemployment that can permanently damage their career prospects. The policy is particularly cruel to minority youth. African American teenage unemployment rates consistently run 2 to 3 times higher than white teenage rates, a gap that widens significantly whenever minimum wage laws are implemented or increased. These aren't just statistics. They represent young people denied the opportunity to develop work skills, establish professional networks, and begin building toward economic independence. Consider what happens in practice when a small business faces increased labor costs. The owner might eliminate one position and require remaining employees to work harder. They might reduce hours, cut benefits, or invest in automation that replaces human workers. They might simply close down if they can't afford the new wage requirements. In every case, the least productive workers, those who most need the experience and income from employment, bear the cost. The cruel irony is that minimum wage laws often benefit more skilled workers at the expense of the less skilled. When employers must pay higher wages, they become more selective, choosing workers with better education, more experience, or greater skills. The marginal workers who most need opportunities find themselves shut out of the job market entirely. This isn't theoretical speculation, it's observable reality in every jurisdiction that has implemented significant minimum wage increases. The supporters of these laws point to workers who keep their jobs and earn higher wages while ignoring those who lose their jobs entirely. They count the seen benefits while ignoring the unseen costs. A far more effective approach to helping low-income workers would involve reducing barriers to employment rather than creating new ones. Eliminate occupational licensing requirements that prevent people from working in fields like hair braiding, food service, or transportation. Reduce payroll taxes that make hiring expensive. Expand the earned income tax credit that supplements wages without destroying jobs. The minimum wage debate perfectly captures why helping the poor requires ignoring feelings in favor of facts. The policy makes supporters feel generous and caring while systematically harming the very people they claim to help. True compassion would focus on expanding opportunities rather than restricting them. Chapter 6: The Regulatory Burden: How Rules Written for Big Business Crush Small Entrepreneurs. Throughout my career studying regulation, I've observed a consistent pattern. Well-intentioned rules designed to protect consumers often end up protecting established businesses from competition while crushing the entrepreneurial opportunities that could lift the poor into the middle class. This regulatory burden falls most heavily on those with the least political influence and fewest resources to navigate complex compliance requirements. Consider occupational licensing, which has exploded from covering less than 5% of workers in the 1950s to nearly 30% today. These requirements supposedly protect consumers by ensuring minimum standards of competence. In practice, they create barriers that prevent entrepreneurial individuals from starting businesses and competing with established providers. In many states, braiding hair requires hundreds of hours of cosmetology training that has nothing to do with braiding techniques. Moving furniture requires expensive licenses and insurance that make it impossible for individuals to offer competitive services. Selling flowers, arranging transportation, or even offering music lessons can require permits, fees, and training that serve mainly to limit competition rather than protect consumers. The human cost is enormous. A single mother who could support her family by braiding hair from her home finds herself barred from this income opportunity by regulations that require expensive schooling in chemical treatments she'll never use. An immigrant entrepreneur who could build a small business offering transportation services discovers that licensing requirements demand resources he doesn't possess and connections he lacks. These barriers particularly harm minority communities, where entrepreneurship has historically provided pathways to economic advancement. When government makes it expensive and complicated to start a business, only those with substantial resources and political connections can navigate the system. The very people who most need economic opportunities find themselves shut out by rules supposedly designed for their protection. The irony runs deeper. Large corporations often support expanded regulation because they can afford compliance costs that crush their smaller competitors. When Walmart endorses increases in the minimum wage or Amazon supports complex shipping regulations, they're not displaying social consciousness. They're using government power to eliminate competition from businesses that can't absorb the regulatory burden. During my work on deregulation in various sectors, I repeatedly saw how reducing regulatory barriers unleashed entrepreneurial energy that benefited consumers and created opportunities for ambitious individuals. The airline deregulation of the late 1970s led to dramatic reductions in airfares and expanded service that made flying accessible to ordinary Americans. Trucking deregulation eliminated cartels that had artificially inflated shipping costs. Financial deregulation enabled innovations that increased competition and improved services. The pattern is consistent. When government reduces barriers to entry, competition increases, prices fall, quality improves, and entrepreneurial opportunities expand. When government increases barriers, established businesses benefit at the expense of consumers and potential competitors. But regulatory reform faces enormous political obstacles because the benefits are diffuse while the costs are concentrated. The thousands of consumers who benefit from lower prices due to increased competition don't organize politically. The established businesses that lose monopoly profits from reduced barriers do organize, lobby, and contribute to politicians who protect their interests. The result is a regulatory system that systematically favors the wealthy and connected over the poor and entrepreneurial. We tell inspiring stories about American opportunity while maintaining a system that makes it increasingly difficult for ambitious individuals to start businesses and compete with established players. True concern for the poor would focus on eliminating these barriers rather than creating new ones. It would recognize that the best anti-poverty program is a job, and the best job creation program is an economy where entrepreneurs can freely compete to serve consumers. Chapter 7: Economic Freedom as the Ultimate Anti-Poverty Program. After decades of studying poverty and social policy, I've reached an inescapable conclusion: economic freedom is the most powerful anti-poverty program ever devised. Not welfare, not government programs, not redistribution schemes, but the simple freedom of individuals to engage in voluntary economic transactions that serve their own interests while serving others. The historical evidence is overwhelming. Every society that has moved from poverty to prosperity has done so by expanding economic freedom, not by expanding government control. Hong Kong transformed from a poor refugee destination to one of the world's wealthiest societies by maintaining minimal regulation and maximum trade freedom. South Korea went from aid recipient to developed economy by embracing market reforms. Even China's remarkable progress came only after abandoning central planning in favor of market mechanisms. In America, our own history tells the same story. The periods of greatest economic growth and social mobility coincided with expansions of economic freedom. The late 19th century, despite its problems, saw unprecedented improvements in living standards for ordinary Americans. The post-World War II boom occurred in a context of relatively limited government intervention in the economy. Even the much-maligned 1980s saw significant reductions in poverty rates as economic growth accelerated following tax and regulatory reforms. But we seem determined to ignore these lessons in favor of policies that feel more compassionate. Instead of removing barriers that prevent the poor from participating in economic growth, we create programs that subsidize their poverty. Instead of expanding opportunities, we provide handouts. Instead of teaching people to fish, we give them fish and wonder why they remain dependent. The mechanism by which economic freedom reduces poverty isn't mysterious. When individuals are free to start businesses, prices reflect true costs and benefits, and competition drives innovation. The result is job creation, wage growth, and expanding opportunities for advancement. When entrepreneurs can freely compete to serve consumers, they create wealth that benefits everyone, including those at the bottom of the income distribution. Consider the technology revolution of recent decades. Government played no role in creating smartphones, personal computers, or internet commerce. These innovations emerged from competitive markets where entrepreneurs competed to serve consumers. Yet they've created millions of jobs, reduced costs for countless goods and services, and provided opportunities for people to earn income in ways that didn't exist a generation ago. The sharing economy illustrates this perfectly. Uber and Lyft didn't emerge from government programs designed to help the poor. They emerged from entrepreneurs seeking to serve consumers more effectively than existing providers. But the result has been the creation of income opportunities for millions of people who might otherwise struggle to find employment. A recent immigrant can earn money driving for rideshare companies without the expensive medallions that traditional taxi regulations required. Similarly, platforms like eBay, Etsy, and Amazon have enabled countless individuals to start small businesses with minimal capital requirements. A stay-at-home parent can build a profitable enterprise selling handmade goods. Someone with specialized knowledge can create online courses that generate income. The barriers to entrepreneurship have never been lower, yet we continue to focus on government programs rather than economic freedom as the solution to poverty. But economic freedom requires more than just the absence of regulation. It requires strong property rights, reliable contract enforcement, sound money, and the rule of law. When people can't be certain they'll keep what they earn, when contracts aren't enforceable, when inflation destroys savings, economic growth becomes impossible. This is why the most effective anti-poverty efforts focus on institutional reform rather than redistribution. Establishing secure property rights for the poor, eliminating barriers to business formation, maintaining price stability, and ensuring equal treatment under law do more to reduce poverty than any welfare program ever conceived. The choice before us is clear. We can continue feeling good about programs that subsidize poverty while maintaining barriers that prevent people from escaping it, or we can embrace the evidence and expand the economic freedom that has lifted more people out of poverty than any other force in human history. Conclusion. The evidence is clear, though many prefer to ignore it. Policies that make us feel compassionate often perpetuate the very problems they claim to solve. True concern for the poor requires courage to follow facts rather than feelings, to measure success by outcomes rather than intentions, to choose what works over what feels right. Welfare systems that discourage work and family formation, minimum wage laws that eliminate job opportunities, regulations that prevent entrepreneurship, rent controls that destroy housing, these policies persist not because they help the poor, but because they satisfy our emotional need to do something. Meanwhile, the proven solutions, economic freedom, market competition, removal of barriers to opportunity, face resistance because they don't provide the immediate satisfaction of visible government action. The ultimate irony is that those who most loudly proclaim their concern for the disadvantaged are often those most determined to deny them the economic freedom that everyone else takes for granted. True compassion demands that we abandon this comfortable self-deception and embrace the reality that markets, not government programs, provide the most reliable path from poverty to prosperity. The choice is ours: continue subsidizing poverty or start expanding opportunity.